I can record on the cloud. Oh, it's going to record on the cloud. Okay, we are recording. So my name is Lauren Miller Donnelly, and I am the Public Access Coordinator with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, Planning and Development. Thank you to everyone who can join us here today. We appreciate your time and willingness to participate in this workshop session aimed at gathering your input. I want to remind you that this program is going to be recorded. Aquatic invasive species pose threats to healthy ecosystems, decrease recreational opportunities and tourism, and cause a myriad of negative economic impacts. In Rhode Island, more than 100 lakes and an additional 27 river segments are plagued with at least one species of invasive plant. These draft regulations primarily focus on the importation, possession, and the sale of freshwater invasive aquatic plants. So let me introduce you to our team. Katie DeGoosh is from the Rhode Island DEM Department of Water Resources, and she more or less will be hosting this presentation. I also have Jillian Thompson. She's the conservation engineer for the Rhode Island DEM Planning and Development team. And then Christine Dudley. She's with RIDEM Fish and Wildlife. She's the Deputy Chief of Freshwater Fisheries. I also see members of our core team here, Matt Green, Ken Ayers, Sue Kiernan, and Christina Hoffsmith are also part of our team. This multidisciplinary team has been working behind the scenes for over a year on this topic and will be available to answer questions after the presentation. Today's workshop will start with an introduction to the regulatory process and a short presentation outlining the draft regulations, followed by a Q&A session. Please make sure to mute yourself during the presentation. You can post your comments or questions in the chat at any time. And following the presentation, it's our intention to upload the PowerPoint and this workshop video so it can be viewed online for those who could not be here today. So without further ado, I'd like to present Katie, who will give us the PowerPoint on these regulations.
All right, let me share my screen. All right, can everyone see that? Hopefully, looks good.
Yes,
right.
Yep, looks good.
All right. So just, guidelines again, written out, just as Lauren just went over. Just please make sure you're muted and we are recording. And most of you have signed in, but please do so if you have not. And if you would rather not sign in publicly, you can just email Christine your email address. So again, the agenda, we'll go through the presentation, outline the draft regulations, explain the regulatory process, and then really just come to a discussion so that we can get feedback today. And if you're not able to provide feedback, we're also accepting feedback through email for the next 10 days. So I'm Katie DeGoosh-DiMarzio. I work in the Rhode Island DEM Office of Water Resources. I wanted to briefly review the regulatory process that we went through that we are going through to adopt the regulations. I want to emphasize this is just a stakeholder meeting, just a workshop, not an official hearing. We're just looking for feedback from everyone today on the proposed regulations. We've not yet set a firm timeline as we want to make sure that we have adequate time to research any feedback, amend the regs if we need to, and prepare any documents for the Office of Regulatory Reform. But we've sort of gotten the first two proponents finished. We've got the draft regs up. I put the link in the chat if anybody wants to look at the PDF. This is our stakeholder Zoom workshop. And then we'll work on feedback. If we need to revise the regs, we can work on that. We'll go through, we have to do a guidance document with like a frequently asked questions that we will draft up. And then once that happens, the regulations are published by the Secretary of State. And there is an official comment period after the official hearing down the line. And once the regulations are promulgated, the rules take effect 120 calendar days from the date that they're promulgated. All right. So just looking at, just to give you some background information about these particular regulations, they go back to 2005 when the Federal Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force issued guidance for states to create aquatic invasive species management plans. If I say AIS, and I often will do that just because I will talk about them a lot. AIS just means aquatic invasive species. But once the feds released their guidance, Rhode Island worked to develop the Rhode Island Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan with the, it was CRMC, DEM, parts of the Rhode Island Invasive Species Council. And we sort of put together the plan. The #1 goal in the plan was to prevent the introduction and establishment of AIS. And research indicates that the sale of oh, sorry, my cats are fighting. Guys. All right. Research indicates that the sale of non-native plants are a major pathway for harmful invasive species to spread into the environment when plants are unintentionally escaping cultivation. And in Rhode Island, we have also seen that they were intentionally planted in some of our ponds. So the tasks 6F and 6G seek to prevent introduction and establishment and minimize risks of introductions by industries such as the aquarium and pet trade, the nursery and water garden trade, and other wetland growers, as well as prevent the risk of introduction by researchers and of public aquaria. So based on these the tasks 6F and 6G, we looked at task 7B, which is to identify the statutory requirements and any gaps that we had in our framework to prevent, control, and minimize AIS impacts. So that led to the legislation that was passed by the state legislature. This slide just gives you the general law that gives the authority for our regulations. It's General Law 20-1-26, and that required DEM to develop these rules. So you can follow the link on the bottom of that screen if you're at your leisure, if you want to look at the very specific statute. So just to go over the draft regulations that we've put together, again, I put the link to the PDF in the chat if you want to follow along. We're not going to go over every bit of it today, but we're going to just sort of give you the highlights, walk you through the basic parts. We'll note some of the species listed, but not all of them. There are 48, and we just don't have time to go through all of them. But if you have specific questions on any one of them, feel free to email us. And you're welcome to just jot questions down as we go through, and then we can just address them at the end of the meeting. Currently, the document is 10 pages long, and once we have adopted it, we'll have that guidance document that I talked about along to explain the regulations and policy in more detail. So just to start off, Part 11.4 is the definition of invasive plants. It specifically defines in this regulation as invasive plants being a vascular plant or a plant part. So that includes eggs, spores, larvae, or another biological product such as a seed. They are non-indigenous, so they're not native to Rhode Island, or they may be a cryptogenic species, which is a species where we don't know the origin. They may threaten the diversity or abundance of invasive species, or excuse me, native species, or they may threaten the ecological stability and or uses of infested waters. So that's how it's defined in the regs. Who does it apply to? Sections 11.3 and 11.4 discuss the activities that are prohibited. It explains both people or businesses are subject to this regulation if they engage in any of the following activities: import, transport, disperse, distribution, introduction, offering for sale, purchase, or possession. Specifically, possession of an invasive plant in this circumstance is limited to managing the plant, cultivating it, or propagating it with the intent to sell. And so that's the important part of that phrase there, is with the intent to sell. So therefore, those businesses or people who currently have a plant or two in their backyard water garden would not be subject to this regulation because they're not selling it specifically. So that's who they apply to. Just in talking about which plants are proposed to be prohibited, we have a draft. It includes 48 species. They are listed alphabetically by scientific name, and the scientific name is as given in the Integrated Taxonomic Information System. So ITIS.gov gives the official names. Also includes synonyms, because depending on what area of the country you're from, there are a lot of different common names. So we're relying specifically on the scientific name. The list also proactively includes both species that are currently here in Rhode Island, as well as those that are not yet here in Rhode Island. And that's just to prevent new invasions from happening. If you are interested in a list of selected plants that are currently in Rhode Island, I have a link on the screen that will give you a list of a select list, not all 48, but where we know we have specific highly invasive plants. The Northeast is a hotspot for projected rise in the number of invasive species with climate change. So with that in mind, we included those species that are not yet here proactively on the list to prevent them from entering Rhode Island as goods for sale. We've already banned the transport of any plant, invasive or otherwise, on boats, trailers, or recreational gear under our fishing regulations. And that was in February of last year. And that's to prevent the unintentional transport of invasives, whereas this regulation targets people or businesses who are bringing or moving or providing invasives for sale here. So the plants that I have on the screen are just plants that we know that we have here. They're pictures that were taken, within the state, but we do have plants that we do not yet have in Rhode Island. And then the last three bullets are, how did we make this list? In order to promote consistent regulations in the region, we included species that were on other lists. So research out of UMass Amherst has shown that invasive plant regulations through throughout New York and New England, they look specifically at the regulations. The study I'm referring to was presented as a webinar, and you're welcome to look that up at the link on the bottom of your screen. But it's a good recording, and you can access that at another time. But the map from that presentation, it colors in states in New York and New England a shade of blue or purple if they have an invasive plant list, so if they have regulations. So you can note that Rhode Island is the only Northeast state that has yet to regulate the sale of plants. And Rhode Island is only one of 5 states nationally that doesn't have a list of invasive species. And at the same token, there are 4 states in the United States that regulate over 100, have over 100 regulated taxa. So UMass compiled the state lists from all of the states in our region. They compiled 207 plants listed in the region that are regulated in 1 or more state. In this map, the darker colored states indicate a higher percentage where the state list matches the regional list. So here, Connecticut is at 37%, and they're the most protective by regulating 37% of the plants on the regional list. But really the take-home message here is that the state's lists are inconsistent. They have varying agreement between their lists. Not all states have the same plants on their list. So this makes checking each state list rather confusing if you are a person or business trying to sell plants in the region. It's difficult to ascertain what you're allowed to sell as it varies across state lines. So in order to align ourselves with our neighboring states and to promote more consistent regulations in the region, we included 47 plants on our list that match at least one criteria that's listed on the screen under number 3. So we looked at plants that are listed on the federal noxious weed list to make sure those plants are also adopted into our state statutes. We looked at plants that are prohibited by other states in the region. We looked at plants that are listed in the Aquatic Invasive Species Management Plan and those nominated by the Rhode Island Invasive Species Council as invasive. So those were our criteria of what other lists we checked. If you want to very specifically look at all the other lists, you're welcome to do that. Again, we're going to post this presentation online. These links are also at the end of the PDF of the draft regulations. So you can check out the other list if you're so inclined. So which plants do we have? We have 48, as I mentioned. I've already found one correction to this list. This is a handy table that we put together. It's included on pages 12 to 16 of the draft regulations that we posted online. And it shows in alphabetical order the scientific name, where that plant is listed in other states. If there's a blank box, that plant is not listed in that state. If there's an X, then it's been listed. And that first, in that first line, the first species, water wheel, is newly listed in New York State. It's also recently listed in New Jersey, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, as it's been found to be highly invasive in Virginia, as well as Pennsylvania. So that's the slight correction that I have to this list that's online right now. There's only one there's only one plant that is included on our list, and it is not meet our criteria of being on another list. And that exception is sacred lotus, which is sold locally, and we know that it was planted in Meshanticut Pond in Cranston. You can see sort of the process of its invasion. We know that it was planted in 2014. Meshanticut, from the aerial maps here, it's in Cranston. It's a 12-acre pond. And over the last 5 years, that one plant has become, was most recently 1.83 acres of coverage in the pond. So, so Nulembo is one. The Nucifera is a plant that is not on any other list. It is currently only in Massachusetts, as the only other state that it's in New England. And it's very similar to the American lotus, which is, you can see there's pictures here on the lower left is the sacred lotus with a pink flower. American lotus generally has a white flower, and the leaves are significantly bigger on the sacred lotus. But we do have like American lotus in, this is Chapman Pond. It's 185 acres. We have aerial views on there too. And you can see from Google Earth that you can see the patch that's grown. It's now over 18 acres. And so that's been there for quite some time. So they're very similar, but we wanted to make sure that we had both American lotus as well as the sacred lotus on our list, as they're both highly invasive here. So that's the exception, and then all the other plants are on another list. In terms of alternate plants that could be used, we've tried to compile some resources here for businesses that are that may be affected by this if they can no longer sell an invasive plant. There are other alternatives that people can both buy or sell. And so that's just some links. And again, this will be posted if you're interested in that. So I will turn it over to Jillian. There we go.
All right, thank you.
Invasive. Yeah.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so we'll jump right into how these regulations will more or less be enforced and what we'll be expecting of the regulated community. First and foremost, will DEM be conducting inspections? And the answer is yes. During normal business hours, a DEM inspector may inspect a business that has plants offered to the public. If the DEM inspector finds a plant that is on the prohibited list or that may be on the prohibited list, the on-site manager will be notified of the regulations, of the prohibitions, and of next steps. Now, if the inspector is unsure of whether the plant is on the prohibited list in these regulations, they may ask for a sample of the plant for identification purposes. And any business that is found to be selling a plant on our prohibited list has 30 days from that notification to dispose of them properly. Next slide. Oh, Katie, could you advance the slide? Katie, all right. I'll go on without the slide right now. Thank you. 30 days to dispose of the plant, and how should that be done? So first and foremost, it has to be done away from any areas that are wet or moist to prevent the continual spread. Acceptable means of disposal as listed in these regulations include burning or incinerating, landfilling, disposing of in a trash can that will eventually be landfilled or incinerated, desiccating the plant, composting as long as it's away from a water source, and any other method as approved or prescribed by the DEM director. Next slide. And so we do have several exemptions included in these regulations. If you're transporting a plant that's on our prohibited list, if you're transporting it for the purpose of harvest control or for disposal, then that is okay. If you're transporting for the purpose of identifying or reporting, that is also okay. In addition to that, for research, education, or field experimentation purposes, herbaria or other preserved specimens are allowed. Controlled environment use, such as in a laboratory for research, also allowed. And if you're conducting field experiments for the purpose of finding control mechanisms, that is allowed so long as it's conducted in a way that's preventing the spread of the species. And caveat to all of that is all specimens must be destroyed once they're no longer in use for the exempt activities. Next slide. And, you know, variances will be considered, variances to these regulations. If you are a business owner or a manager and you feel that you would be able to possess an aquatic invasive plant that is on our prohibited list, and you would be able to do it in a way that presents no harm to the human health or the environment, then DEM may consider a variance. It must be through a written request where you identify exactly which part of the regulation you're requesting variance from. It will be considered by the director. There may be a public comment period, and then a decision on that variance will be provided in writing. An appeal process is also in place in the event that you disagree with that decision. Next slide. And penalty for violations are not to be more than $500 per violation. And that's just across the board for anybody found to be in violation of any part of these regs. And I believe that is it. I'll pass it over to Chris and we'll open it up for comments, question, and discussion.
Hello, everyone. We've got plenty of time for your questions or comments, and we will be recording it, so we will be able to keep track of all these good questions. We need your input. We need your feedback. It's very, very important. So I guess, are we going to have a shared screen again? So I can see who is talking, perhaps. There we go. Okay, that works good. Okay, do we have some questions from anyone? You can unmute yourself and raise your hand, or there's a little hand, I think, that shows up if you want to answer a question, or some comments, or perhaps some assistance that you can give us, things we hadn't thought of.
Hi.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, I'm Sally Johnson. I'm on the board of the Rhode Island Wild Plant Society, and we'd like to commend you for taking this step. And hopefully it's the first step of going from aquatic to fully all invasive species in Rhode Island, because it's, as you know, overtaking the world, and seeing that one lotus plant was just indicative of what's happening elsewhere too. But it's nice to have that example of the lotus plant when people ask you. So we're fully in favor. If there's anything we can do for support, we'll put it in our newsletter to mention it's going on. But
It's wonderful.
thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you. Someone else?
Yeah, I have just a comment. I am a volunteer watershed watch person on Waterman Lake in northern Rhode Island, and I've seen the progression of the lily plant in parts of Waterman Lake that's just taken over in the last few years, and I'm very concerned. So I happened to get a chance to watch the what was happening down at Meshanikat Park in the water. And I was wondering if you can tell me how we can set up something to help with the weeds on the lake. And was there a certain progression that they went through? Who did they contact in order to get people to go out there and volunteer to eradicate this plant?
Nancy.
Katie will jump in here.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk offline because it's kind of a long story. But yeah, we helped set that up and get a volunteer group together. So I think you have your email in the chat. I'll email you.
Okay,
We can chat about it.
all right, thank you.
I would say anyone else that belongs to a group or lives on a pond or lake that has different issues. I know there are some lake associations. Please also get in touch with us to see how that process. It was a very, very well done process and a lot of volunteers, and they did do quite a bit of work that made a big difference. So
It was amazing to watch.
yes, yes, thank you. That we need more of that. Some other questions?
Yeah, this is, I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey, and the Natural History Survey chairs the Rhode Island Invasive Species Council, which is kind of a voluntary coordinating platform for this subject. And so this is something that I've been working on for a long time, and I want to second Sally's commendation of you all for this hard work and getting this to this point. It's been a long time coming, and I think it's going to be a really big help. So I think that's terrific. I also wanted to say that I was particularly appreciative of your efforts to coordinate with the other states in the region. I think that that's a good first step towards more coordination, and I think in the long run, that's an approach that will be really helpful. It's going to be the future, and the sooner we get to the future, the better. I had a question, and that is with the definition of possess. So I was glad to hear, I think Katie mentioned that there is a separate regulatory approach to plants on trailers and boats, because I was worried that the definition of possession here might stop the enforcement of accidental possession on trailers. And so I'm glad to hear that that's separately regulated. But my question was just, in the definition of possession, there's a whole string of commas that ends with or propagation with the intent to offer for sale to other persons. And it's not clear whether the limitation to people offering the plants for sale applies only to those propagating or to those cultivating, planting, pruning, and fertilizing. And I'm not sure exactly how lawyers word these long strings of commas. They're often wrong. But I can see problems there, because it looks like you're going to regulate anybody planting and pruning and only those propagating for sale. So that's my thought.
That's a good point, and I would ask that we will take a good look at that. We do have one of our attorneys on the call, Christina, and we can look at that and make sure that those commas don't negate the really purpose of that part of it. Thank you for pointing that out. Anybody else? Any other questions or ideas? Something we missed, perhaps, something that we haven't thought of. We tried to think of everything.
Hi, this is Kate McPherson with Save the Bay. And again, I want to echo that this is an important first step. We would love to see regulations for not just aquatic invasive species, but land-based invasive species. I can't tell you how many hundreds of hours I've spent managing non-native invasive species on properties all over the state. And it's sort of a never-ending battle. And then when you see, your neighbor planting a nice long row of burning bush, it's like, oh gosh. So an important first step, but for sure, the work still needs to happen. One thing that I can see being really useful for folks that may not spend a whole lot of time thinking about whether or not a plant they choose to plant in their water garden or in their lawn is native or not native, is coming up with these guides for alternatives for plants. You know, if you want a flowering plant that's purple, here's a great native plant. And then working, I'm not sure if David Gregg and RINS is still doing propagation of native seeds, but coming up with sources for nurseries so that they can offer native plants to folks who want to, either who don't know that they want to plant natives, or you know, want an alternative to something that they would just go to. And I think the first step is coming up with, you know, like color coded, make it super easy for somebody who just wants to go to a store and buy a plant to be like, okay, here's something that will look just as good. And then follow-up steps are to make sure that these native plants are available for folks that want to plant them. But thanks, awesome work, and Save the Bay definitely supports you.
That's a really good point. I want to again point out that Katie has so many great links on this PowerPoint for all kinds of information that you might need. And I agree. And you know, and I even think that, you know, perhaps someday there might even be a special tag on some plants that are being sold that this is native, or something that really gives people the idea that they can be proactive about the environment. It has gotten out of control, and we really need to band together and work on this very, very carefully. All good questions. We still have a little bit more time.
Well, ideas on the plant list. We do not have in Rhode Island a good single plant list. But it's not at all user friendly. It would be a great place to take the lead for consolidating their list with the Go Botany. I'd be happy to help at it and talking to some of the people. So it is difficult to find in one spot that's available for purchase. The other comment I had, which I'm wondering about, is I do a lot of volunteering at various gardens, and I suppose I won't name them because they do bad things, of lotuses in pots, and volunteers giving the lotuses in pots. And I might even have one in my contained garden, didn't really know. Is there anything, maybe not penalizing, but trying to contact all of the gardens of the state, encouraging them, because although native everywhere, my garden really strives for it. Those sacred lotuses are freaking gorgeous. So gardens are inclined to put them in. So maybe some thought might be given around at least notification or suggestion that these people who put in, you know, these water gardens say something to say, or some way of discouraging. So I'm not quite sure what the proper mechanism would be, but I know that there are botanical gardens, pretty much everyone that I work at that has that has a water garden has invasives in it.
Well, I think that we can utilize, you know, press releases about the, you know, there's must be a better time of the year when people can be notified about this, when they would be receiving them or purchasing them, and perhaps through social media. We've found our social media is really doing very well in getting the word out, plus press releases or flyers. You know, I think we can make an effort that way.
I mean, Master Gardeners may be a place to start, but
Yeah.
you know, some sort of thing that says DEM says telling them invasives grow really easily, so they're giving them. So it's you know, maybe something along that line. So thank you very much for holding this meeting also. I appreciate it, Christine.
That's great. That's a great idea, Sally. Wonderful. Anyone else? Nancy, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes.
Oh, Katie, okay.
Hey, I had a quick question.
Okay, go ahead.
My name's Katie Rodrigue. I work for Division of Marine Fisheries, but I'm actually just kind of here because I myself have an ornamental koi pond in my yard, so I'm kind of interested in this topic. I think this is great. think this is awesome work that you guys are doing. I was just curious about a couple of the species on the list. Common water hyacinth and the anchored water hyacinth, actually, and then also the water lettuce. So I thought that those species really can't overwinter anywhere close to Rhode Island. So I'm just curious, maybe I'm wrong about that. And I was just curious if have there been any observed issues with those species? And, you know, if not, or if so, whatever. I just would like to know if you guys have suggestions for alternative species that I might be able to look for that are similar in like that floating and sort of spread over the surface, because they're super beneficial for my pond. They're great oxygenators and they encourage my koi to breed. So if you guys have suggestions, I'd like to hear them.
Katie, you want to take that?
Sure. We've found water hyacinth and water lettuce in Rhode Island. We found more water hyacinth, I believe, and in pretty large numbers in a few places. It's not known to overwinter here, but it can grow to cover it's known to be an acre in a growing season. And so we found it in pretty sensitive areas like the Pawcatuck River. And so that was really our impetus for including it, because even though it may not overwinter yet, and the climate could change, but in one season it can expand considerably. In terms of suggestions for other ones, it is hard to find that type of floating independent plant, but I know that some of those resources that are on that long list of links do have some suggestions for alternatives, especially for like the, you know, if you can find a purple flowering one like pickerelweed, which is native.
Thank you.
But that's a good question.
Do we have any other questions? I've got the experts here. No, no other questions? Well, if you do think of something later, please email me. My email is attached. It's christine.dudley@dem.ri.gov, and we can address those questions. They're all helpful to us as we synthesize this. I think we've done a pretty good job, and I don't speak for myself. I speak for the experts I have on my team that know these plants much better than I do, that they've done a wonderful job. And please be in touch with us, and you should be able to see what the next steps are. We would be announcing a hearing schedule once we get some of our other paperwork done. And we hope that you can also attend that as well. But there's plenty of time for questions and input. So please don't forget us. Okay.
And I just wanted to remind you all that we are going to upload this PowerPoint and this presentation online. So if you want to share it with your colleagues or people that you know would be interested, please do. Let them know about the feedback period. One thing about, you know, that sacred lotus is just a beautiful plant. These invasive plants are beautiful and people want them. And that is some of the trickery behind why they're here and why they're succeeding. So I really like Nancy's input about educating people, because you can make these regulations, but there's a little bit of outreach that comes to follow. I'm really glad that you all were able to join us today. And like I said, you can email Christine if you have any more questions, or look online for this presentation, and we'll take your email and send you a nice thank you and follow-up email with some of these links. And we're really glad to have some of you experts with and support with us.
That makes it all worthwhile. Thank you so much, everyone.